Hello, Joseph.
Hi there.
Oh, now I'm not hearing him. Did I
Can you
miss
hear me now?
something? Let me
Are
just try
you
to
picking it up?
fix this. Can you speak?
Yep. Can you hear me here?
Okay, now I can hear you. All right,
How does
how
it
are you
sound?
doing?
I'm very well. Been working a lot, so a bit tired, but I'm good. You?
I'm doing very good. So you saw a previous discussion, I believe it was between me and Todd Lewis, and you wanted to chime in as a Christian.
Yep. Yep, that's me.
Uh,
Quite a bit of what he said, I thought that in many ways he hadn't really understood any of the alt-right or identitarian views that he was trying to kind of examine and from a Christian perspective, but he just hadn't realized what they were. Came with a very American perspective, which I don't really like.
and what's your perspective on Christianity?
I am very much dyed-in-the-wool Christian, as you would say, I guess. Um, so probably quite similar to his, but my opinion on the right wing and identitarian, alt-right, or whatever you want to call it, is very different to his. And I think that's very easy to, like that's very in line with Christianity, both of our views. But I would like to readdress some of the stuff you addressed with him.
Okay. And are you an alt-righter?
I would call myself identitarian. I wouldn't necessarily say it right because I think there's a lot more baggage that comes with the label that I don't really want to have to deal with. But
Hmm.
essentially, very, very closely aligned.
Okay. So you believe that there's no contradiction between Christianity and identitarianism at the state level or nation level?
Absolutely not. Yeah,
Okay.
anyone who would say there's a contradiction, I would just point them to the whole Old Testament, which has got a lot of ethnic cleansing and ethnically defined states and boundaries.
All
Like,
right.
read the source material, like, please.
And so
Anyway,
do you take issue with the fact that today we look at the Bible, there are false factual claims in this? Is that a problem for you?
um, I think the way that that question is framed is wrong in the sense that many people look at something as a factual claim, but don't actually understand that it's not necessarily. So, I mean, that the favorite for atheists to go for, as we all know, is Genesis. They just, you know, it's irresistible.
Yeah.
And the reality is, I mean, most Christians, historically speaking, have had radically different views on how that is, and most of them don't take it literally. It's a very American puritanical sect of Christianity who has a literal interpretation of it. I mean, just to quote some that, even you as dyed-in-the-wool atheist, burn the Catholics, uh, would know, St. Augustine of Hippo, who he defined the Christian state in the 4th century, and he believed that Genesis was a literary text and not literal at all, and that the world was millennia old. Another one, Thomas Aquinas, also very famous um, in secular circles, even for his philosophical works. Once again, did not believe in the literal Genesis, and I can go through how we base that belief in whatever. But I would say that most of what you would claim are factual claims that are incorrect are, in fact, not factual claims, but rather literary tools for establishing other information.
Yeah, I mean, I don't object to this vision of Christianity as long as Christians say this is a story that's meant to frame the human mind and it's a good story. It doesn't invade on the science, on the progression of science or empiricism in and of itself. And the claims that are made in there are not to be interpreted as scientific claims. I don't take issue with this. My problem in the interview with Todd is that I said, do you think that the Bible contains the truth? And he didn't answer. And he acted then for several minutes as if his response, or at least he was suggesting that his response to the question is yes, the Bible is the truth, the literal truth.
Well, literal is a silly word because, I mean, let's just take the example of in the Bible, Jesus describes himself as the door. Now, he's not literally a door made of wood or metal or plastic, but he is a figurative, door in the Christian belief as in a way of passing through one stage of being into another. So yeah, it's not literal as in actual in a physical sense, but it's literal in a metaphorical sense, I guess. So I think many people come at it with a very basic understanding and
Yeah.
have issues with, yeah. So I would say that, as far as science goes, I have absolutely no issue accepting modern science because it's not actually in contradiction.
So do you live in the US?
No, it's one of the few countries I haven't been to. I am South African originally and born and raised there, and then spent my high school years in the UK, and then went back to South Africa as an adult to live there, and recently have moved to New Zealand. So
Nice.
I'm a ruthless cosmopolitan white identitarian.
Wow. Okay. And New Zealand, is that a good place to live?
I would say so, definitely. As far as peace of life and ability to create a life, yeah, very good.
And how's the immigration situation in New Zealand?
Um, it's the largest percentage immigrant of any country in the world, any major country. Like I think maybe like Singapore would be high, but any like country that's beyond a city state, it's the largest percentage. And there's not many issues because they've been very strict on immigration. So it's in a sense similar to Canada that you've got a lot of high-end Asian immigration, but you've also got a lot of primarily the main immigrant groups are English and South Africans, followed by Chinese. So the main groups are still Anglosphere. They speak English, they arrive, you can't tell them apart until you talk to them. So yeah, big numbers, but very similar civilizationally.
Okay. I don't know. Is there anything else that you wanted to discuss with me?
Yeah, so I had gone through and listed some of the things I felt that he had gotten wrong about it. So let's see. Well, the one assertion that you made was Christianity had failed in the West. I think we can start with that one because it had failed to reproduce itself in the next generation.
Yeah.
So I thought this was an interesting assertion, and yeah, and I can explain like the historical, reasons for this. The removal of the institutions of propagation, which weren't just churches but schools and education centers, and all sorts of other stuff like that. But I think a more interesting take on it is I don't think atheists are a new thing in a sense, a new thought pattern. I think you are a lot more Christian than you would actually allow yourself to believe, because Christianity is fundamentally logocentrism. So all that God is the embodiment of that in a kind of unified creator sense. But you still are logocentric. You prioritize the truth in every way, and that is not a belief system that comes out of a vacuum. That's
I
based in
mean, I
Christianity. So
always say
I would
that,
say,
yes, I have been influenced by Catholicism. And to me, the kind of generous aspect of my personality probably has been coming from Catholicism. Now, I'm not sure I understand the logocentrism, the search for
like,
truth.
yeah. So basically, in Christianity, a very good way to prove this is if anyone feels like looking at scripture. I mean, John 1, which is the start of one of the Gospels. So it's basically the key part of the Christianity defines God repeatedly as the Logos, which is the embodiment of truth. So as when Jordan Peterson describes the Logos and everything, and that is Christianity's view of God. God is truth, So that's, how you can explain the Trinity, because truth is one. You can't have two truths that are in conflict because one of them would be a lie. So, in a sense, you are still worshipping the truth in the essence that is what you put first. So when you spend your life as a scientist pursuing truth, in a sense, you are worshipping the logos through your actions. And
I
that is
don't like this
actually,
relabeling. I think it's a kind of I'm not accusing you of maliciously doing it, but to me that's word salad.
no,
It
I
means
hear what you're
nothing.
saying with that. No, I hear what you're saying with that. But what I'm saying is the difference between the worldview of someone who's atheist and someone who's Christian is actually much smaller than most people think. Because intellectual Christianity is the deification of the logos, because God is, it describes, there was, in the beginning, there was the logos. That's it. The logos is synonymous with God. So what I'm saying is, for you and for a Christian, you are pursuing, in a sense, most of the time, the same thing, pursuing truth. I mean, in a day-to-day life, you pursue many things, but in a kind of what you focus on in the future is actually the same thing. That is what you're putting first in your intellectual pursuit. So I would say that there's a much bigger similarity than most atheists would like to admit.
I have I'm not convinced by it because then any creature that seeks the truth, that gathers factual information from the world, could be said to be partly Christian by the standard, and then squirrels are Christian.
It's an interesting point, but I think there's a difference between seeking truth and engaging with reality. Because you're not just, how do I live life and, make a good income and blah, blah, blah. You actually want to understand levels of truth which aren't necessarily applicable in your daily life in a, very rudimentary sense. And at the same time, if we compare it to other belief systems, we can see that in different belief systems and different cultures, communism is about power, Islam's about dominance. Tribalism is about identity in a very basic level. So you've got all these different things that this is what they idolize and search towards. Whereas with Christianity and with atheism, in the kind of Western sense of it, in the scientific sense of it, both pursuing truth. So I think while we disagree, I think aims-wise, I think atheists don't realize, and Christians also, just guilty of, don't realize how similar the two are.
Your choice to construct it that way, but again, you said that the squirrel was engaging with reality. This is what I'm doing when I search for the truth. I'm doing nothing else than engaging with reality. In fact, the root of my empiricism is based on this. It's not even a moral comment that I say we should be interested in reality. I say, as an agent in a physical universe, all I can do is interact with reality and make theories about it based on the networks that evolution has needed to put into my brain. So, I mean,
Yeah,
I
I
guess we
hear what
can
you're
agree
saying
to
first,
disagree.
and I agree with what you're saying, and I agree that your motivation may not be the same. But what I'm saying is you choose to prioritize that over seeking power or seeking domination or any of the other potential ways of ordering the world around you. You have chosen to put truth at the top of your hierarchy. But we can agree to disagree, but what I'm saying is you prioritizing similar thing, same thing, really.
All right.
Oh.
And then was there other points of questioning?
At one stage, you were discussing with him whether or not the church was involved in the suppression of science. And this is where he got like all fedora tipping, which is very lame and anti-intellectual.
Yeah, and I want to say there's lots of people who have misinterpreted what I said in that stream. People are like, "Oh, Jeff, you conclude that science represses that Christianity has repressed science institutionally and systematically." I never said that. All I asked to Todd was, "Well, do you deny that there are some cases of religion impeding on science?" That's all I asked, and I made the case that yes, there are some cases of religious people impeding on the progression of science.
I guess you could, look at it at, if at any stage religion stopped anyone who was of a scientific mind, then yes, there could be cases, but the reasons for them often were not the science. Everyone loves to throw burning of the library in Alexandria or the imprisonment of Galileo. And both of those were cases which had nothing to do with science. And I can go through the history and provide you the quotes and the source, primary documents and everything to prove this. But I mean, the point is, many times, there's a stigma attached. And actually, if we look at, my ancestry, a lot of it's from Italy. If we go to Italy and look at it, all of the founding universities of the West are in Italy, and all of them were church universities that were looking at primarily anatomy to start with, to for the purpose of improving medicine. But this was the basis of Western learning, was in the West, of it being rekindled after the barbarian invasions. So I think, on a net benefit wise, definitely the church is has done a lot. But I would say that it's this whole framing of it is the church contrary to science, or has the church suppressed science, is almost an irrelevant question, because science happened where the church was and not where it wasn't.
I mean, it's never a case that I've been wanting to make, so I wouldn't be interested in digging through the Galileo case and know was it religion or not, because all I did with Todd was say, well, there are some instances of religions impeding on education and science. And I know that there are many cases of religions driving science forward, and Christianity in particular. And I know that Christianity has been the seat for the birth of many universities, and I'm fine with this, so I don't contest that.
I like that, because I think just sick of having to go over this with everyone I talk to, that okay, Galileo was imprisoned for defaming the Pope. Yeah.
Okay.
Who cares? Yeah, exactly.
Well, that sounds like a religious oppression of freedom, at least, if not science, at least freedom.
Yeah, he created the Pope into a character called Simple. So yeah, if you go after a landed man with an empire he's trying to maintain, okay, you land in prison. This is no different today.
Well, it is different in countries that allow freedom of speech.
Yeah, freedom of speech, but I mean, we still can be given trouble for talking to who's really in charge, for undermining what's really going on. I mean, I don't have freedom of speech in South Africa.
No,
I don't have freedom of speech in the UK. Maybe some people in America do. You don't in Canada. There are people you can't talk about in Canada.
Yeah, to some extent, I agree. The US may be the only case of full freedom of speech, and even then, it's contested by many people because there's lots of private oppression of freedom of speech.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Was there anything else you wanted to review?
Sorry, I'm just going to go down my list quickly. Yeah. I mean, I didn't have any other major issues. One other thing was, you're talking about conversion rates, and statistically speaking, in the West, what we're actually seeing is polarization of religious and irreligious, not mass conversions either way. They're actually pretty stable. So while less people identify as Christian, the church attendance hasn't decreased dramatically since the 80s or 90s, depending what country.
Well, in Canada, church attendance is extremely reduced. I understand that the US is different. The US has a more Puritanist and religious, fanatical aspect to it that we don't have in Canada. But yeah, my statement on that to Todd was, within the last 50 years, there is more conversion toward stated atheism, at least.
Yeah. So it's a self-identification question, not church attendance question.
Yeah.
In reality, church attendance peaked in the 1860s and was at current levels in many countries in the West by 1920. It hasn't actually reduced dramatically since then. And I would say that, when people talk about wanting to have a Christian society, they either don't know what they're talking about, as in it's never been everyone in church on a Sunday, or they wanting just in a more what's promoted culturally and what's the basis of the governmental culture and whatever, rather than, and what's the basis of understanding in, say, higher education or whatever, rather than this idea that everyone's in church clapping along or whatever they do. So I just because one statement you said is, oh, Christianity was defeated by the four horsemen. And saying, well, yeah, you can look at it that way. Or the four horsemen convinced a whole bunch of people who were identifying culturally to no longer identify culturally. You know,
Yeah,
because
I agree that what the crowd that was catched by the Four Horsemen, it was probably a predisposed crowd in some
yeah,
way, but they were given a label that was not much adhered to before atheism, which now people adhere to.
yeah. I guess it created almost like a cultural identity around the whole thing anyway. Like in addition to then just the kind of intellectual atheism that was maybe predating that.
Yeah, I
But
agree.
seeing as what's happened to all the atheist commentators on YouTube and whatever that came out of that time, I wouldn't necessarily stand by their empiricism or cognitive faculties. So
Well, I
with the
mean,
exception of Walski, because I like Walski, but the rest of them,
atheism in France, for example, is very dominant. I haven't watched
yeah,
the numbers for years, but France atheism,
no, it's very
uh,
high.
at
It always
least
has been.
29% of the country's population identifies as atheist, and 63% as non-religious.
Yeah. So in France, you've just seen. I think France is just ahead in the people who would have previously called themselves Christian, but not engaged in a Christian community or lifestyle or anything, have just decided to identify as atheist rather. And I think that's all that's
Yeah,
happening now in the West. Because if you look once again, like from the 80s or the 90s, church attendance hasn't dropped in most Western countries, but the percentage Christian rather than atheist has dramatically. People no longer are identifying with a label that means nothing to them. It doesn't. No,
all right. Yeah, my
no. That's
statement about the Four Horsemen was a little provocative. I will
yeah,
get that. But I mean, the Four Horsemen did intellectually dismantle a conception of Christianity, which is the literal conception. They did well at it, I find.
yeah. And what's quite funny is once again because that's actually I would probably say a minority in Christian circles and primarily in America that see it like that in a literalistic kind of way. Um, it was very much an American phenomenon, and also that's where the whole like tips fedora thing comes from, is because often people who never believed in that kind of literalistic interpretation feel like that's always argued against them, and they're like, well, you're going to convince me with arguing against something I don't even believe in. It's the ultimate straw man, which is quite frustrating. Give
Yeah.
us good arguments, please.
Yeah, I did find that Richard Dawkins and the other horsemen, they are sometimes going too aggressive on the literal interpretation, and I find that it took time before they were well equipped to actually address the intellectual point of people like William Lane Craig and people who were defending a more refined view of God that was
Yeah,
more rooted in rational philosophy, which I find
yeah,
still lacks, but it was good arguments.
yeah, exactly. I mean, William Lane Craig, he's still quite literalistic, actually. People like John Lennox are much more interesting because they are much more. They see it much more as a literary kind of thing all the way, and analyze it as such in a very interesting way, which I think probably would appeal to pagans, but as a side tangent. But anyway,
All right.